Gamar Tov. One of my favorite ways to relax is reading, primarily novels and often science fiction or speculative fiction. Yes, your rabbi is a nerd. And not that long ago, I started a book called The Measure. It's part science fiction, part extended parable. The premise is this. One morning, everyone in the world over the age of 22 wakes up to find a small box on their doorstep. From homeless people in city centers to Mongolian nomads living on windswept steppes, everyone, no matter who or where they are, wakes up to find these same small boxes. And inside the boxes are strings. The strings and the boxes, we learn, are indestructible and made of no known materials. And in the beginning, there's great confusion about who or where the boxes came from, to say nothing of the strings. And the next day, new boxes appear on the doorsteps of everyone who is turning 22 that day. The only difference between the boxes is that some people have long strings and others have short strings. Generally, younger people have longer strings and older people have short strings, but not always. And before long, it becomes clear that the strings represent the amount of time a person has left to live. Once the media and the politicians understand this, things go off the rails. Here's an excerpt about what happens after short stringers begin to realize that their time is limited. Homes and possessions were sold. Jobs were abandoned, all in pursuit of making the most of one's time. Some wanted to travel, to live on the beach, to spend time with their children, to paint and to sing and to write and to dance. Others dove into an abyss of anger, envy, and violence. The book continues to describe a society remade by the precise knowledge of mortality. The twist, of course, is that there are people who choose not to open their boxes. Most do, but in every country in the world, there remain a small minority who resist their curiosity or their fear and go on living the way everyone did before the boxes arrived, not knowing how much time they have left. All of us sitting here tonight are that minority. We don't know exactly how much time we have left. We don't know the length of our strings. And I'd imagine that we're just fine with that. But today, on the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur, we step back from the gift of our ignorance and ask, what if we did know the length of our days? Would we live them differently? How would we fill the books of our lives? And would we be content with what we'd already written in them? This evening's sermon was originally going to be about climate change. I spent much of the summer reading about the pace of global warming, the rapidly increasing rate of extinction and deforestation, the melting of the polar ice caps and glaciers, wildfires and droughts, 100-year-old floods that have now become yearly floods, and other terrifying changes. I even spoke to a few experts to learn if there was anything that we, as individuals and as a community, could do to mitigate the impending storm. So I'll give it to you in 4 sentences. Vote for conservation advocates and those committed to environmentalism. That's the way to make the biggest impact. But also consider trading in your SUVs and Suburbans for smaller, more fuel-efficient cars. Compost as much as you can, and stop eating meat. In any case, I was getting ready to start writing when life had other plans. On September 11th, my Uncle Sandy, my mom's brother, died of pancreatic cancer at the age of 76. And I, along with my immediate and extended family, traveled to Kittery, Maine for the week to bury and to mourn my uncle. It was, for all of us who loved Sandy, a tragedy. See, my Uncle Sandy was one of the most dynamic, vibrant, alive people I have ever known. He was a kayaker and a runner, a hiker and a doer. His downstairs neighbors called him the Energizer Bunny because it seemed like he never stopped moving. But it wasn't just his athletic prowess. Uncle Sandy was married to the love of his life. He had a huge circle of friends, 2 kids and 4 grandkids who adored him, and a passion for music and volunteering. He served on the board of his condo association and his synagogue, volunteered for too many nonprofits to name, and spent years volunteering as a big brother. Sometimes his ebullient, unstoppable energy could even be exhausting or annoying. At family get-togethers, whenever we'd all be vegging on the couch, he was famous for forcing us all to get up and go for a walk, or hiking, or to the beach. Long before his diagnosis, he wanted to savor every minute and eke out as much joy and goodness out of his life as he could. We joked that he should have another career as a cruise ship social director. And I suspect I know why. My Uncle Sandy had 2 kids, a boy and a girl, Adam and Alex. Adam is a stay-at-home dad, a writer, and a musician. And Alex, who has an MBA and used to work in the corporate world, recently decided to become a nurse. They're both wonderful people, kind and smart, thoughtful and funny. But originally, there was also a 3rd child, my cousin Davida. Davida was born a year after me, a happy, healthy, and beautiful baby. And then when she was a toddler, she stopped thriving. She stopped progressing. When my aunt and uncle took her to the doctor, they ran a series of tests. And though in utero, Davida had tested incorrectly negative for Tay-Sachs disease, when she was tested again as a toddler, she tested positive. It was devastating. And after years of terrible sadness, Davida died when she was just shy of 7 years old. And no one, especially my aunt or my uncle, ever truly recovered. But Davida's death did one other thing. It made all of us far more aware of how tenuous and fragile life is, how easy and terrible it is to wake up one day to find that our strings, or the strings of those we love, are perilously short. Which is why I think my Uncle Sandy was not going to let his pass him by. He was going to live. And he was going to make sure that everyone else did too. So that even when he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, he didn't stop hiking or kayaking or volunteering. He took his grandkids fishing, and he played the flute with my niece Molly. He traveled as much as his health allowed. He kept singing. And a few days after he was diagnosed, he and my Aunt Helene drove down here to Greenwich to attend my installation. And he started reaching out more to all of us. He organized a COVID Zoom Seder. Or I'd get a phone call at the most random times, 8:30 a.m. on a Saturday morning. He'd be at the beach, and he just decided to say hi. "Hey, Jord," he'd say, "what's going on?" He just wanted, he told me, to check in, to see what was up. I knew he hated the phone. He always had. And so usually less than 5 minutes later, he'd abruptly say, "Okay, well, good talk, love you," and hang up. Here's the thing about the strings in the novel. They could be measured and judged against the length of other strings. The refrain quickly became, in private and in public, "How long is your string?" It was asked over quiet family dinners, over the phone with old friends, on first dates. Long or short? Let's compare. Let me take the measure of you. Much of the book hinges on how relationships were shaped, ended, and valued by the differentials. Which is, of course, a profoundly human preoccupation, to measure and count, to compare ourselves to others, to quantify. And if it is a deeply human habit, it is even more pronounced here in Greenwich. As a community, we are at times a kind of a caricature of counting. We ask out loud and behind closed doors, how much did the neighbors make? How much did that house cost? What kind of car are they driving? What is it worth? And that purse? Do you know how much that purse is? Where do they vacation? What colleges did their kids get into? And we begin, some of us, to base our sense of ourselves and our loved ones and our successes and our failures against the answers to these questions, we begin to think that what a thing is worth is what a person is worth, even if, on some level, we know better. But there are always outliers, people who know intrinsically that their belongings and successes and job titles and bank accounts are not what ultimately will define them or their lives. Take Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia, one of the best-known outdoor brands in the world, whose vests are beloved to hedge fund analysts everywhere. I discovered this when I moved to Greenwich. Just a few weeks ago, Chouinard announced that he was transferring the entire $3 billion corporation into specialized trust and nonprofit organization solely committed to conservation efforts to combat climate change. To quote an article about the decision published in the New York Times this past September 14th, in August, the family irrevocably transferred all the company's voting stock, equivalent to 2% of the overall shares, into a newly established entity known as the Patagonia Purpose Trust. The trust, which will be overseen by members of the family and their closest advisors, is intended to ensure that Patagonia makes good on its commitment to run a socially responsible business and give away its profits. Because the Chouinards donated their shares to a trust, the family will pay about $17.5 million in taxes on the gift. They then donated the other 98% of Patagonia, its common shares, to a newly established nonprofit organization called the Holdfast Collective, which will now be the recipient of all the company's profits and will use the funds to combat climate change. Because the Holdfast Collective is a 501c4, which allows it to make unlimited political contributions, the family received no tax benefit for its donation. There was a meaningful cost to them doing it, but it was a cost they were willing to bear to ensure that the company stays true to their principles, said Dan Mosley, a partner at BDT & Company, a merchant bank that works with ultra-wealthy individuals, including Warren Buffett, and who helped Patagonia to design the new structure. And they didn't get a charitable deduction for it. There is no tax benefit here whatsoever. But here's the thing. Most of us are not Yvon Chouinard, even if, like me, we own too many Patagonia products. We're not able to be as unattached to status and signifiers or as grounded and clear on what really matters and is worthy about each of us. And so we need Yom Kippur as a yearly reminder. We need Yom Kippur because it too is about quantifying, but not our stuff, not our titles or numbers, but what actually matters. It's a reminder that if we were to die tomorrow or next month or next year or 50 years from now, what will be most precious about each of our lives and eternal about our time here is not our things or our connections or our titles. It's what we gave away, what and how we loved, how much we laughed, how much we eased other suffering, and to what extent we made the world a better place with what we did, what we said, and what we gave. And so let me share with you what I learned on the day we buried my Uncle Sandy. Maybe his last lesson. The numbers that count are these. The number of people in the sanctuary at your funeral service. It was standing room only, and it was a very big room. The number of people at your graveside. So many that there were no more parking spaces. The number of nonprofits that your family didn't even know you were volunteering for, but they found out about at your Shiva. The number of people who come up to you and tell you how uncommonly kind your uncle was and what he meant to them. And maybe in our family, most of all, the number of times your children and your grandchildren and your wife and your sister and your nieces and your in-laws and all the rest of your family laugh when they remember your quirks and cry when they hear the sound of the flute that you so love to play. And if you still need to quantify your life, I understand. But don't judge it by the numbers that Greenwich tells you are important. Judge it by what Judaism tells us matters. Judge it by how many acts of kindness you do each day, how much you give away to people and causes that need it, how often you don't snap at someone who is unkind to you and instead ask if they're okay. Count how many times you call your friends or family each week and tell them that you love them. Count how many hugs you give, how much solace you offer, how much suffering you ease. Count how much you have to give, and then give it. That, my friends, is the measure of our lives. It's not in the length of our strings or the numbers in our bank account. It's not the labels on our clothes or our cars. It's not the diplomas on our walls or the price of our real estate. It's in the goodness we leave behind, the kindness we offer, and the example we set. And so whether your days are long or short, my prayer for each of us this Yom Kippur is this: may the measure of all of your days be counted in goodness, in compassion, and in love. And may they be filled with sweetness and with joy. Gamar Chatima Tova. May you all be sealed for a good year in the book of life.